Part 60. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 591. But after waiting for this moment, Eternal Thunder Dragon's face suddenly became ugly. His face seemed to be twisted together, and there was a kind of surprise in the corners of his eyes and brows. No way, it can never be like this, it can never be like this. Eternal Thunder Dragon's voice was even like this, trembling slightly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he was as confused as a 2-foot-long monk. He couldn't help but frown slightly, and then said in a low voice, "What happened? Do you know something?" At this time, Lin Yu was speaking softly and unhurriedly, with a somewhat complicated meaning flashing in his eyes. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Eternal Thunder Dragon just pondered for a moment, and then said helplessly, "If I guess correctly, this red-trained yellow sand beast should be the Mother Earth, the red-trained yellow sand beast that Gaia sat down on." After hearing what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, Lin Yu's eyes were quite astonished. At this time, his voice could not help but sound slightly higher than before. "What? Are you sure you're not kidding me?" Lin Yu said softly, with a look of complete disbelief between his brows. At this time, his face could not help but twitch slightly. At this time, Lin Yu's thoughts moved, and then the red-trained yellow sand beast appeared in front of him. The growth rate of this red-trained yellow sand beast was not slow. At first, it was just smaller than newborn babies are slightly larger. But now, it is actually a little taller than Lin Yu. The eyes of this red-trained yellow sand beast were filled with a kind of loneliness and arrogance. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon saw this scene, his face was slightly ugly. At this time, his face also twisted suddenly, and then he said in a cold voice, "I didn't expect you to hide in reincarnation to protect yourself. This is really something I didn't expect." Eternal Thunder Dragon said in a cold voice, his eyes fixed on the red sand beast. A bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. At this time, after the Kilian Huangsha beast heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was something quite a bit in his eyes. A lot of ridicule. "What? Isn't it okay for me to hide in this reincarnation? But what I never expected is that a big guy like you can actually survive until now. Why didn't those four-dimensional creatures completely destroy you back then?" The sneer on the corner of Kilian Huangsha beast's mouth became more and more obvious, and his eyes were full of mockery. At this time, after the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what the Scarlet Lian Yellow Sand Beast said, its eyes were full of contempt. It just looked towards the Red Lian Yellow Sand Beast so coldly. Glancing at it, a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I'm telling you, I'm afraid even if you die, turn into ashes, and fall into reincarnation forever, nothing will happen to me." After the Kilian Yellow Sand Beast heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, the corners of his mouth just raised a slight sneer, and then he shook his head slightly. "Really? Then you are really awesome, and I really admire it. You." It's just that the voice of the red-trained yellow sand beast was full of sarcasm, and it seemed that he was extremely disdainful of this. After Eternal Thunder Dragon saw this scene, he flew directly in front of the Red Lian Yellow Sand Beast. His huge body blocked the front of the Red Lian Yellow Sand Beast, and there was a violent and roiling force in his body. The momentum gradually began to show. After seeing this scene, the Red Sand Beast subconsciously took a few steps back and looked at the Eternal Thunder Dragon with vigilance. "You, what do you want to do?" There was something gloomy in the voice of the red-trained yellow sand beast. After all, the current red refined yellow sand beast also knew that he would never be the opponent of this Eternal Thunder Dragon, so at this time, he subconsciously took a few steps back, looking a little panicked. The Eternal Thunder Dragon took a step straight forward, and then showed its momentum without reservation. The violent momentum rolled up and down, giving this red-trained yellow sand beast an unparalleled sense of oppression. Qilian Huangsha beast felt his heart suddenly startled. At this time, his eyes were full of unwillingness. At this time, the Qilian Huangsha beast also fully felt what it felt like to be bullied by a dog when the tiger fell to the ground, and the Eternal Thunder Dragon naturally felt excited and excited. The eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon looked up and down at the Qilian Huangsha beast. I won't bully you either, but I can't just let this matter go. Eternal Thunder Dragon's voice was firm and crisp. Of course, the red-trained yellow sand beast also understood the character of the Eternal Thunder Dragon, so he just snorted coldly, and then said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, I will satisfy you when the time comes. I'm just afraid that you won't survive, that's just the time." The voice of the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast gradually became colder. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast said, his whole body instantly burst out with a powerful aura, followed by lightning around him. They all fell on him. After the Qilian yellow sand beast felt the lightning and thunder around him, the expression on his face instantly solidified, and a feeling of danger surged into his heart. This feeling of danger made him subconsciously want to escape directly like this. The red-trained yellow sand beast was so frightened that it backed away one after another. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he just shook his head and smiled, and then glanced at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. "Be careful, don't scare this guy, look at this guy being scared by you," Lin Yu just said in a low voice. When the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu say this, he just pondered for a moment and then snorted coldly. "It's okay not to scare him. I'm just afraid that he won't have a long memory. The stupid guy doesn't even look at what the situation is now, and he dares to threaten me. Damn it!" Eternal Thunder Dragon almost said through gritted teeth. The murderous intent on his body was very obvious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chang. Chapter 592. Naturally, the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast does not dare to make any mistakes at this time. After all, the strength of the Eternal Thunder Dragon is here. Even if the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast does not want to admit it, he has to admit the strength of the Eternal Thunder Dragon. The horror and the scary. The red sand beast tilted its head slightly to the side, snorted coldly, and said nothing more. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he felt helpless and speechless. He didn't know how to persuade the red-trained yellow sand beast not to pay attention to this matter. At this moment, someone knocked on his door. Lin Yu's expression tightened, and then he said in a deep voice, "Who is it?" Lin Yu's voice was a little cold. Then he heard a voice coming from outside the door. "It's me. The visitor is Elder Dugu." After Lin Yu heard Elder Dugu finish speaking, he opened the door with a smile, and then respectfully invited Elder Dugu in. "Elder Dugu, why are you here?" Elder Dugu coughed lightly. "Ahem, don't you still know why I came here? I just came here to find you, a stinky boy." Lin Yu heard this and was a little confused after Elder Dugu said this. He had no idea what medicine was being sold in Elder Dugu's gourd. Elder Dugu laughed, "Ha ha ha, you don't have to be too nervous. I want to take you to my class tomorrow. It's time for you to meet your senior brothers and sisters. What's more, you can also I don't know who told the news about the hatching of this red-trained yellow sand beast, but they admire you very much." Elder Dugu had a kind face. If Lin Yu didn't know what Elder Dugu was planning, then he probably wouldn't have thought about who was behind the scenes. But now Elder Dugu's face, yes, you can see clearly. So of course he understood what Elder Dugu wanted to do. "Elder Dugu, thank you very much. I will attend class on time tomorrow." Elder Dugu nodded with satisfaction, and then smiled at Lin Yu. "You must be careful at today's banquet. Now that the news has spread like wildfire, I don't know how many pairs of eyes are watching on your body, so." Although Elder Dugu did not continue speaking, Lin Yu also understood what Elder Dugu meant. He just smiled. "Hey, don't worry, Elder Dugu, I understand what you mean, I understand what you mean. Elder Dugu nodded slightly, it's good that you can understand what I mean. You must be careful and don't fall into the trap of those traitors. And if my prediction is correct, that old guy definitely wants to win you over. Murong, that old guy is not a good thing, so stay away from him. Lin Yu could understand them. There might be some incompatibility between the two of them, which was why they were like this. However, at this moment, Lin Yu didn't really show anything, he just smiled. Don't worry about this, I have my own sense of discretion, and I won't embarrass you when the time comes. What Lin Yu said was already obvious. Elder Dugu was obviously quite satisfied with this answer. Then Elder Dugu remembered the matter of Dugu Qinghong. Elder Dugu glanced at Lin Yu, and then coughed lightly, ahem, what do you think of Qinghong? Elder Dugu's meaning was quite obvious. Lin Yu also understood what Elder Dugu meant. He just coughed lightly, ahem, I think Qinghong is naturally good. Elder Dugu stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, ha ha ha, silly boy, I feel that Qinghong has a good feeling for you. She may be extremely dissatisfied with me, an old guy, but she may still be quite fond of you. Although Elder Dugu said something in his words, the meaning of his words was also extremely clear. At this time, Lin Yu could only look around and smile. Ha ha ha, is that true? I feel like he still respects you, Elder Dugu. And isn't it good that the feelings between the two of you are different? Lin Yu stared at Elder Dugu with a smile on his face, and the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. Elder Dugu also laughed loudly, and then nodded slightly, ha ha ha, maybe, this girl will get married after all. Elder Dugu's meaning is very obvious. After all, if he tries to win over Lin Yu now, even if he cannot snatch the red-trained yellow sand beast from Lin Yu's hands, he will still be able to continue calling Lin Yu. For your own use. Elder Dugu had a good plan, but Lin Yu also understood Elder Dugu's plan, so he just smiled and didn't answer. It's getting late, it seems like it's time for me to leave. Lin Yu said softly, and finally glanced in Elder Dugu's direction. After Elder Dugu heard what Lin Yu said, he coughed lightly, and then smiled softly. Ha ha ha, okay, now it's time for you to leave. If that's the case, then I won't disturb you, kid. Go quickly. Elder Dugu waved his hand gently. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled after hearing what Elder Dugu said, and then he directly raised his steps and walked outside. Elder Dugu stared at Lin Yu's back, and after a moment's silence, he shook his head slightly, smelly boy, I hope you have good luck. After Elder Dugu finished speaking, he walked outside. When Lin Yu walked outside, Dugu Qinghong had been waiting for him outside. When Dugu Qinghong saw Lin Yu, she jumped in front of Lin Yu, staring at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, as if she had encountered something happy. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was also a little strange, so she looked at Dugu Qinghong and then coughed lightly. Hey, what are you laughing at? Did you encounter something happy? Dugu Qinghong nodded, there is indeed something worth being happy about, but guess what it is? Lin Yu pondered for a moment, touched his chin, and then shook his head, I don't know. Dugu Qinghong looked at Lin Yu unhappily and rolled his eyes, tisk, someone will come back this time. Dugu Qinghong's eyes were about to flash with little stars, and it seemed that he was extremely looking forward to the arrival of that person. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 593. At this time, Lin Yu was a little curious about who the guy Xiaonazai was looking forward to, so he just glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, I'm really curious. Who is the person who can make you, a little girl, full of expectations. How about you tell me? Lin Yu stared at Dugu Qinghong with a smile, and then whispered like this. Dugu Qinghong pondered for a moment, and then said to Lin Yu in a mysterious manner, of course it's that guy Murong Kong's brother, Murong Changa. He has been our big brother since he was a child. After Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he just rubbed Dugu Qinghong's little head with a doting look on his face, and there was quite a bit of doting in his eyes. This is really a good thing for you, ha ha ha. Dugu Qinghong nodded heavily, that's natural. It's naturally a great thing for brother Murong to come back this time. Dugu Qinghong had a happy smile on his face. Lin Yu heard that after Murong Qinghong said this, for some reason, he suddenly realized that this time everyone seemed to be extremely concerned about the red-trained yellow sand beast he had hatched. Naturally, this was also the case. It smells like conspiracy. Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, his face full of worry. After Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, he seemed to be able to detect the worry on Lin Yu's face at this moment. So at this time, Dugu Qinghong jumped directly in front of Lin Yu, nailed Lin Yu with a smile, and then whispered like this, what are you thinking about? When Lin Yu heard Dugu Qinghong's voice, he came to his senses instantly, and then quickly waved his hand, nothing, nothing. When Dugu Qinghong saw Lin Yu like this, he knew that he must be hiding something from him because of the rain. But looking at Lin Yu's reaction now, he probably wouldn't say anything to him. So at this time, Dugu Qinghong just snorted, humph, forget it if you don't tell me. In fact, I know even if you don't tell me. You are afraid that brother Murong's return will be detrimental to you this time. I am right or not? Dugu Qinghong's voice turned slightly cold. Lin Yu pondered for a moment, and then nodded slightly, indeed, I am indeed a little worried about this. When Dugu Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, he sighed, actually, from my point of view, you don't need to worry about this at all. After Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, a bit of curiosity flashed in his eyes, why? Dugu Qinghong took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Actually, the reason is for no other reason than that brother Murong is definitely not the kind of person you think. What Dugu Qinghong said was categorical, and it seemed that he was extremely confident in this Murong Changa. At this moment, after hearing what Dugu Qinghong said, Lin Yu just waved his hands and smiled, I hope it's really what you said. At the banquet, a man in casual clothes arrived in front of a man in a white suit. The man sat directly in front of Murong Changa. At this moment, Murong Changa was sitting upright. After seeing Murong Kong, he just smiled like this. His eyes were quite kind, at least not as fierce and decisive as before. Murong Kong just sat directly in front of Murong Changa, raised his head and glanced at Murong Changa, and then said coldly, I don't care about anything else, but brother, you must do a good job this time, teach that boy a lesson, I can't bear it anyway. After Murong Changa heard what Murong Kong said, he just pondered for a moment, and then smiled like this. You should come and tell me what is going on. At this time, Murong Kong began to speak bit by bit, his voice getting louder and louder, and his words became more and more exciting. Murong Changa heard it. After Murong Kong finished speaking, he touched his chin gently and just smiled like this, oh, it's really interesting. I didn't expect this little guy to be so interesting as what he said to you. This is really something I didn't expect. Murong Changa just spoke softly and unhurriedly. At this time, Murong Kong heard it. After Murong Changa finished speaking, he also sighed for a long time, oh, who says it's not true? I have a bad headache. I have a bad headache now. Anyway, I can't swallow this breath. Brother, you must do it for me, I'm in charge. Teach that guy a lesson. At this time, Murong Kong also suddenly, as if he remembered something, turned his head and glanced at Murong Changa, and then said softly, if I remember correctly, Did that guy just hatch the strange beast that can be promoted to the realm of gods? Murong Changa said softly. When Murong Kong heard Murong Changa finish speaking, he also pondered for a moment, and then nodded lightly. Yes, but what does this have to do with it? Murong Kong said calmly. Murong Changa shook his head, then poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Murong Kong. He called Murong Kong with a smile on his face and looked very unhappy. Murong Kong came straight to Murong Changa, his eyes fixed on her. Brother, what's going on? Do you know something? You must know something, right? Murong Changa just nodded. I do know something, but don't be anxious. You can't eat hot tofu in a hurry. I believe you understand this truth. Murong Changa said slowly. Murong Kong pondered for a moment, and finally sighed, alas, I know this truth, but... At this time, Murong Changa slowly stood up, raised his hand to check the time on his watch, and then shook his head slightly. It's time to go out to meet the guests. After Murong Changa finished speaking, he walked out. At this time Murong Kong opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but after seeing his brother's look, he instantly realized that it would be useless for him to talk. After all, he knew his brother's character too well, and no one could change his mind once he made up his mind. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 594. At this time, Murong Kong stood up slowly. He knew his brother very well, and he probably wanted to make friends with this guy this time, and he might even feel wronged by him. But as soon as Murong Kong thought of what happened before, an unknown secret fire suddenly rose in his chest. Anyway, for him, he would certainly not be willing to admit this matter in silence. Murong Kong clenched his fists, and then said through gritted teeth, anyway, if it's like this, I won't accept it. Murong Kong said almost through gritted teeth. In fact, Murong Kong is said to be a dandy, but it is just because it is a means of self-protection for Murong Kong. He is still young, and most of the family's power is in the hands of his brother. If he doesn't behave anymore, if he were a bit more dandy, I'm afraid he would have been like his younger brothers, who had an unexpected accident. Among the children of this aristocratic family, once they entered the wealthy family, they were as deep as the sea. From then on, Xiao Lang was a stranger. Of course, they were different from those outside, very different. Murong Kong's eyes flashed with determination, the time seems to be coming soon. After he finished speaking, he drank all the tea in the cup, then stood up and walked out. At this time, Murong Kong's steps were very light, and his footsteps were also very light. After Murong Kong walked out, he met a person face to face. The person was wearing white clothes and holding a folding fan in his hand. This person was very energetic. At a glance, he knew that he must be this high-level charioteer. Beast Master. At this time, the Peach Boy just waved the folding fan in his hand so gently, and the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, after Murong Kong saw young Master Peach like this, the expression on his face began to become slightly ugly. At this time, his expression also tightened slightly, and then he whispered like this, "You, who is it?" At this time, young Master Peach Blossom heard this. After Murong Kong said this, a bit of solemnity flashed across his face, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly, and then looked at him with a smile on his face. He glanced at Murong Kong. "You don't need to know who I am, but there is something I need to remind you. It's up to you whether you want to hear it or not." Mr. Peach Blossom just said this unhurriedly, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of teasing in his eyes. At this time, after Murong Kong heard what Mr. Peach Blossom said, his face turned slightly ugly, and then he asked in a low voice, "I wonder what you want to tell me." At this time, Murong Kong said softly. And at this time, The Peach Blossom boy was also looking at Murong back and forth with a smile on his face. Ha ha ha, actually it's just something about your brother. You must be very interested in this matter. Mr. Peach Blossom spoke softly and unhurriedly, with a hint of joking in his eyes and a hint of playfulness in the corner of his mouth. At this time, when Murong saw young Master Peach looking at him like this, a complicated meaning flashed in his eyes, and then he spoke softly. My brother's problem? I don't think there is any problem with my brother. The relationship between the two of us is very good. I hope that Mr. Dehua will not sow trouble between the two of us. Murong stared at Mr. Peach Blossom with a smile on his face, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Murong spoke softly. After a while, young Master Peach Blossom heard what Murong said. He just pondered for a moment, and then his expression tightened slightly. After a while, Murong seemed to have remembered something. After a while, he shook his head slightly. No, something is wrong. Why did you come to find me? The reason shouldn't be that simple, right? Murong said in a cold voice, and then slowly walked forward, step by step, showing off all the momentum in his body. At this time, Mr. Peach Blossom really smiled after hearing what Murong said, and then shook his head slightly. You probably don't know the reason for this. There are many things that you and I can't explain clearly. If you believe it, then believe it. If you don't believe it, forget it. At this time, Mr. Peach Blossom was talking like this with a smile on his face. And at this moment, Murong seemed to have remembered something, his face condensed slightly, and then a smile appeared from the corner of his mouth. Interesting, I know you know very well what kind of person I am, but I still say the same thing, I trust my brother very much, and I also believe that my brother will never do anything harmful to me, so goodbye. At this time, after Murong finished speaking, he turned around and left. At this time, the eyes of the Peach Blossom Prince were fixed on Murong back. After a moment's silence, he said coldly, Are you sure? I heard something, but I don't know if you are curious about it. The smile on the corner of the Peach Blossom Prince's mouth became more and more obvious, and then he casually spread his hands. At this time, Murong seemed to remember something. He suddenly took a step forward, and then came to the side of the Peach Blossom Prince. Finally, he just sneered, What did you hear? Tell me, I really want to listen. Murong almost gritted his teeth and said. After a moment, the Peach Blossom Prince smiled coldly, then waved his hand gently, leaned down, and whispered in Murong's ear. I heard that you have been recruiting soldiers recently, and almost half of the senior leaders in the Battle Academy seem to have some relationship with you. However, I am very curious about one thing, that is, why do you want to provoke Elder Dugu? You should know that Elder Dugu plays an important role in this Battle Academy. It is unwise to provoke him. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 595. At this time, Mr. Peach Blossom was talking unhurriedly, and after finishing speaking, he stared directly at Murong. After Murong heard what Mr. Peach Blossom said, his whole expression sank slightly. At this time, Mr. Peach also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. How did you know? The murderous aura in Murong's body began to become more and more obvious. At this time, a cold aura gradually began to spread around him. That cold aura made everyone shudder. Feeling. At this time, young Master Peach even felt a hint of danger. He could certainly imagine how terrifying it would be for someone with such a calm and ruthless nature like Murong to get angry. So when Mr. Peach thought about this, he couldn't help but ponder for a long time. I just want to make friends with you, and by the way, I also want to participate in what you want to do. I think if I do this, it shouldn't be too much. Mr. Peach Blossom's voice was a little cold, and at this time, his whole voice was even trembling. At this time, the fear in Mr. Peach Blossom's heart was beyond words, but at this time, he still forcibly cheered up, and then he spoke in a deep voice. After waiting for a while, Murong-Kong also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. But I don't really want to cooperate with you, and the two of us don't seem to be suitable for cooperation. If you cooperate with me, aren't you afraid that you will die without a burial place? Murong-Kong said this half-jokingly. At this time, he looked much more relaxed than before. After Mr. Peach Blossom heard what Murong-Kong said, his whole mood began to gradually become more relaxed, and then he continued to speak in a low voice. Of course I'm not afraid. Of course I believe that Mr. Murong will never be that kind of person. I believe in Mr. Murong's character. Mr. Peach Blossom spoke softly and leisurely, and the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. At this time, after Murong-Kong heard what Mr. Peach Blossom said, he couldn't help but burst out laughing, as if he had heard the most ridiculous joke in the world, laughing wildly. At this time, Mr. Peach Blossom's face began to look a little ugly. After all, the guy in front of him seemed to be a little too disrespectful to himself. That feeling of disrespect made Mr. Peach Blossom very unhappy. Mr. Peach's voice was a little cold, and then he said in a deep voice, I don't like your voice very much, and I don't like it when you say that. Do you understand? Peach Blossom's voice was even a little hoarse. At this moment, Murong-Kong just took a step forward, arrived in front of young Master Peach Blossom, and then spoke coldly into young Master Peach Blossom's ear. It's okay if you don't like it. If you don't like it, just bear with it. Do you understand? Murong-Kong's voice was a bit cold, and the murderous aura in his body was gradually revealed. At this time, Mr. Peach Blossom began to realize the tyranny of the guy in front of him. Mr. Peach Blossom's face was a little ugly, but he still took a deep breath and calmed down his mood. Okay, very good, I hope you can keep this attitude. At this time, Murong-Kong just waved his hands casually after hearing what Mr. Peach Blossom said, and then said in a cold voice, yes, I can indeed maintain this attitude all the time. You don't need to worry about this. Murong-Kong stared at Mr. Peach Blossom with a smile on his face, as if he didn't pay attention to Mr. Peach Blossom's warning at all. Mr. Peach Blossom was so angry that his teeth were itching, but after staying there for a long time, he didn't know how to refute. He only felt that although the guy in front of him was rogue, he was very helpless. At this moment, a man walked in slowly. When the man saw the two of them standing together, his eyes were a little strange. What are you doing? The man spoke softly. At this time, after hearing what the man said, Mr. Dehua just turned his head and glanced at Murong-Changa, and finally pretended to be relaxed. It's nothing, I just think your brother is a bit interesting. Just now just discussed some very interesting issues with your brother. At this time, Murong-Kong nodded solemnly, and then smiled at Murong-Changa, brother, if you have nothing to do, I have to leave. Murong-Kong just said it unhurriedly. At this time, after Murong-Changa heard what Murong-Kong said, he just waved his hand casually, let's go, let's go. After waiting for a moment, Murong-Kong seemed to remember something. There's something I want to say. Mr. Peach Blossom's eyes were paying close attention to Murong-Kong's every move, his face suddenly turned cold, and the fierce aura on his body was fully revealed at this moment. Murong-Changa turned his head and glanced at Murong-Kong. There was quite a bit of kindness in his eyes and a bit of a smile on his face. Did you remember something again? Just tell me if you have anything to say. Murong-Changa said softly. At this time, Murong-Kong just shook his head and smiled, actually, it's not a big deal. I'm just thinking about you, brother. Maybe I'll see the woman you've been thinking about for a while. At this time, Murong Changa just glared at Murong Kong fiercely, and then raised his fist. After Murong Kong saw this scene, he quickly turned around and ran outside. "Brother, I just remembered that I seem to have some unfinished business. I'm leaving first." After Murong Kong finished speaking, he ran away quickly. Murong Changa shook his head, and finally let out a long sigh. "Oh, it's hard to say it all, it's hard to say it all. Every family has sutras that are difficult to recite. It's a headache. It's really a headache." Murong Changa just smiled at Mr. Peach Blossom. At this moment, Mr. Peach Blossom also glanced at Murong Changa. "I heard that that guy will come today. I'm really curious. Who is he? He can actually hatch the alien egg of the red sand beast." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 596. Young Master Peach Blossom heard this. After Murong Changa said this, he just pondered for a moment, and then shook his head slightly. "I don't know exactly what kind of guy he is, but I can be sure that that guy is not simple." Murong Changa just spoke softly, with a hint of fear in his words. Young Master Peach waved his hand casually, and then smiled softly. "No matter what, whether that guy is simple or not, anyway, the current Zillion Huangsha hand is still very weak, and I heard that there are no strange beasts around that guy, so I want to deal with it according to him. It shouldn't be too difficult." Murong Changa nailed Mr. Peach Blossom with a smile on his face, and the meaning in his words was very obvious. Murong Changa's expression froze, and after pondering for a moment, he gently touched his chin. "What you said is true. If that person really doesn't accept the two of us trying to win over him now, then if necessary, I'm afraid we will have to get rid of him." After Murong Changa finished speaking, the murderous intention in his body began to gradually show up. After waiting for a while, Murong Changa seemed to suddenly remember something. "There's something I want to tell you." Mr. Peach Blossom's expression tightened, and then he scratched his head and smiled. He turned his head and looked at Murong Changa, and then spoke softly. "If you have anything to say, just say it." Murong Changa was stunned for a while, and then he said in a low voice, "Actually, it's not a big deal, it's just that I always felt that my brother seemed a little abnormal, but I remember I called you a few days ago. Did you find anything after investigating that boy?" Murong Changa's eyes were somewhat cold and stern. At this time, when Mr. Peach Blossom heard what Murong Changa said, he was slightly startled at first, and then he forced out a smile, and then waved his hands gently. "Ha ha ha, what's the problem? That boy is very normal. I say you should stop being so suspicious now. There is no need to doubt that boy. After all, he is just a dude in your family. What do you think?" Young Master Peach Blossom glanced at Murong Changa, and then whispered like this. When Murong Changa saw Mr. Peach Blossom, after saying this, he was stunned. He touched his chin, pondered for a while, and nodded slightly. "Yes, what you said is indeed true. There is indeed no need to take this kid too seriously." Murong Changa just waved his hand, and then stood up directly. Young Master Peach Blossom breathed a sigh of relief after seeing Murong Changa without raising any suspicion. Mr. Peach let out a long sigh, and finally seemed to remember something. "There's something I don't know whether to talk about or not," Mr. Peach whispered. Murong Changa glanced at Mr. Peach Blossom, and finally smiled like this. "Whatever you want to say, just say it. There is no right to say it or not." At this time, Murong Changa also had a somewhat kind look on his face. Young Master Peach took a deep breath, and then took out something from his arms. "This is a small pink medicine bottle. What exactly is the elixir contained in this medicine bottle? Presumably everyone should know it. Mr. Peach Blossom gently patted Murong Changa's shoulder, and the smile on his face looked a little elusive. Murong Changa looked at the small medicine bottle handed to him by Mr. Peach Blossom, and just fiddled with it back and forth for a while, with a bit of curiosity flashing across his face. "What did you give me? It's really interesting," Murong Changa said softly. The smile on Mr. Peach's face was simply hard to hide. "What is this thing? You don't know, right?" The Peach Boy's smile was even a little lewd. After Murong Changa heard what Mr. Peach Blossom said, he immediately understood what Mr. Peach Blossom meant. He just waved his hand lightly and wanted to throw the small medicine bottle away. "I think you should also know that I am not the kind of person you think. What is the use of giving this to me?" Murong Changa's voice was a little cold. Mr. Peach Blossom laughed, and then he gently opened the folding fan in his hand, and he spoke unhurriedly. "Don't you know the reason for this? I'm obviously creating opportunities for you," Mr. Peach said softly. Murong Changa clenched his fists. At this moment, the temperature around him seemed to have dropped several degrees. Everyone had a cold feeling, which spread like this. At this time, young Master Peach Blossom could also clearly feel Murong Changa's anger at this moment. At this time, Murong Changa just threw this thing directly to Mr. Peach Blossom. "I will tell you again today, I don't need such a thing, you can take it back yourself." After Murong Changa finished speaking, he wanted to turn around and leave. But at this time, Mr. Peach Blossom stopped him in front of Murong Changa. Mr. Peach Blossom just smiled. "I know that you don't like this kind of thing. But I also know better that this kind of thing is actually very useful to you," Mr. Peach Blossom said with a smile. At this time, he could clearly detect that Murong Changa's eyes were even a little moved. He didn't know why Mr. Peach Blossom actually took this thing away like this. "Return," Mr. Peach said softly. "However, if you really don't want it, then I can take it back reluctantly, but you'd better think it over yourself. Anyway, after passing this village now, there is no such store." At this moment, Mr. Peach Blossom took advantage of the situation and wanted to get up and leave. In the end, Murong Changa couldn't help it anymore and called out to young Master Peach Blossom, etc. Mr. Peach Blossom, who had already reached the door, seemed to have expected that Murong Changa would call him. At this time, he also slowly stopped, and then turned his head towards Murong Changa. "Take a look." "What? Is there anything wrong with Mr. Murong?" Young Master Peach Blossom stared at Murong Changa with a smile. Murong Changa coughed lightly, and then said in a deep voice, "Leave that thing to me." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 597. At this time, Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong also felt that the banquet was going on, but when they arrived, Lin Yu was like this when he was in front of Murong's house. He suddenly stopped and raised his head. Lai glanced ahead, with a bit of worry in his eyes. After Dugu Qinghong saw Lin Yu like this, he instantly understood what Lin Yu was thinking, so at this time he walked to Lin Yu's side, and then smiled. "What? What's wrong with you?" After Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he just turned his head and glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then coughed lightly. "Ahem, it's nothing, nothing happened." At this time, Dugu Qinghong obviously did not believe what Lin Yu said. So at this time, Dugu Qinghong also smiled like this. "Ahem, I know you are scared. Today's event will be a hangmen banquet. Am I right or wrong?" Dugu Qinghong whispered, looking at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, but his eyes seemed to be twinkling with starlight, which made him even more charming. After hearing what Dugu Qinghong said, Lin Yu just sighed. "Oh, there are some things that you and I can't predict. I have a headache, a real headache." Lin Yu said softly. After Dugu Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, he just waved his hand casually, "Don't think so much. After all, it was the city lord who invited you here today. If you really encounter any problems, there will naturally be someone there by then, don't let him go." When Dugu Qinghong said the last words, the murderous intention and decisiveness in his body were instantly apparent. When Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he just pondered for a moment, and then waved and smiled, "What you said is indeed true. Mirongfu shouldn't come to me this time. I'm just afraid of trouble." Lin Yu paused after saying this, but the worry in his words was still very obvious. Dugu Qinghong just waved his hand. "What are you thinking about so much? Believe me, it will be okay this time." Dugu Qinghong's eyes were shining with light, and there was quite a bit of excitement between his brows. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled after hearing Dugu Qinghong's comfort, and then gently rubbed Dugu Qinghong's little head, with a rather doting look on his face. "Maybe, I hope so." After waiting for a while, Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong walked forward. After they walked for a while, they crossed the lobby and arrived at the banquet place. At this time, countless handsome men and beauties gathered together. When Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong arrived here, everyone's his eyes looked towards them at the same time. A handsome, tall, and handsome man slowly came to Dugu Qinghong with a glass of red wine. He gently shook the glass with a slight smile on his face. "Qinghong, you are finally here." After Dugu Qinghong saw this man, he just smiled, and then he jumped up to the man. "When did you come back? Why haven't you come back all these years?" Dugu Qinghong said softly. Murong Changa looked like his eyes were full of kindness, just like the big brother next door. However, the gloomy feeling that Murong Changa gave off made Lin Yu dislike it very much, so Lin Yu didn't like it. Naturally, Yu was too lazy to get close to Murong Changa. Murong Changa finally noticed Lin Yu, and then whispered, "Presumably this is the person who hatched this red-trained yellow sand beast. What a talent, what a talent." Murong Changa laughed loudly. At this time, Lin Yu heard Murong Changa, and after saying this, he just nodded lightly, and then waved his hands casually. No, I am not a talent, but you are a human being, Zhong Longfeng." Dugu Qinghong on the side heard Lin Yu. After saying this, he just said in a low voice, "Praise each other." Although Dugu Qinghong spoke in a low voice, the two of them could hear it clearly. The two of them laughed loudly at this moment, and then waved their hands casually. "It seems that this time I made the little princess unhappy." Murong Changa just spoke unhurriedly. Dugu Qinghong heard it. After Murong Changa finished speaking, he just curled his lips. "Tisk, you only know now." After Murong Changa and Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, they just looked at each other, and then coughed lightly. "Ahem, you are really unreasonable and unforgiving. You are exactly the same as you were when you were a child." At this moment, a middle-aged man slowly walked out. The middle-aged man walked towards the two of them, and then you looked at the two of them like this. Looking at the faces of the two of you, you are quite similar. You might as well become brothers of the opposite sex. After Lin Yu heard what Murongfu said, he just turned his head and glanced at Murongfu, and then gave Murongfu a fist cup salute. Lord Murong is joking. How can I compare myself with Mr. Murong, who is of such status? This is inappropriate, it is really inappropriate. Lin Yu's refusal was very clear. Murongfu and Murong Changa looked a little ugly after hearing what Lin Yu said, but after a while, they still laughed out loud. Well, let's just forget about it. Let's forget about it for now." Murong Changa made a gesture of invitation. "Mr. Lin, Grandpa, Miss Dugu, please." Then they walked forward like this. Now Lin Yu was led by Murongfu and Murong Changa in front of him, and everyone naturally focused their attention on Lin Yu. "Have you heard? The god-level alien beast egg in Tianbeizai was hatched by someone. I just found out about this recently. A person whispered to himself, and the person next to him said so softly. At this moment, the guy next to the man heard it, and his face slightly raised after he said it. Are you telling the truth? This shouldn't be possible. Where did you hear this gossip from? Is it reliable? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 598. And the guy next to that person at this time, after hearing what the person next to him said, he glared at him angrily, and then spoke softly. Why is it unreliable? I have a cousin who is a clerk in Tianbei, and Mr. Chen has already issued an order saying that no one can tell anyone about this matter. Of course you won't know it, otherwise, don't forget that this guy was on the street a few days ago, but he just offended Mr. Murong. The two people were talking quietly like this. At this moment, among the crowd, after hearing the discussion between the two of them, a woman raised her head and glanced at Lin Yu, her eyes full of complexity. The woman clenched her fists, and then said in a deep voice, "No matter what, that strange beast can only be mine." The woman was almost gnashing her teeth like this, and her expression was terrifyingly serious. This woman was extremely beautiful and had a graceful figure. All the people's eyes turned towards the woman at the same time, and they were naturally attracted to this woman. It's just that the expression on this woman's face was a little too serious, making everyone feel shuddering. Everyone just smiled like this, and their expressions gave people an indescribable weird feeling. At this moment, the woman turned around and looked back, and then left directly. Lin Yu, Murongfu, and Murong Chang'e just sat on the main seats. Murong Kong, who was at the side at this time, just glanced at him from afar, then turned around and left without looking back. He must have been very angry, because he didn't know whether he left intentionally or unintentionally. Deliberately smashing a door into pieces. Everyone was not surprised by this scene. They just thought it was a bit funny, but in front of Murongfu, no one dared to show this funny, so they could only endure it. Lin Yu coughed lightly. Ahem. Murongfu was just stunned for a moment, and then he waved his hand and smiled. Oh, this guy has been spoiled by me. I hope Mr. Lin won't take this matter to heart. Don't take this matter to heart, good. Murongfu said softly. Lin Yu heard that after Murongfu finished speaking, he just waved his hands casually, and then smiled slightly. What Mr. Murong said is just because he is young and doesn't understand some things. Elders should be tolerant. Murong Kong was taken advantage of in vain, and Murong Chang'e's face was a little ugly. After all, Murong Kong was his younger brother. If Lin Yu became Murong Kong's elder, then I am afraid that Lin Yu should also be his elder. At this time, after Murongfu heard what Lin Yu said, his face did not show any displeasure. He just coughed lightly. Ahem, what Mr. Lin said is true. Since Mr. Lin is so magnanimous, then Mr. Lin must not take it to heart about what happened before. Murongfu turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, and then spoke in a low voice. Lin Yu heard it. After Murongfu finished speaking, he just waved his hand slightly. How is it possible? What happened before is in the past. As an elder, how can I argue with this junior every day? At this time, Lin Yu deliberately spoke so loudly. Murongfu's face looked a little ugly. At this time, he couldn't help it anymore. After Lin Yu saw Murongfu like this, he smiled deliberately and spoke in a considerate manner. Mr. Murong, why is this so? Is there something uncomfortable? If Mr. Murong feels uncomfortable, just tell him. I also know some medical skills, so I can help Mr. Murong. But at this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Murongfu's face became more and more ugly. Murongfu turned his fists and then waved his hands. That's not necessary, Chang'e. You must take good care of Mr. Lin when he is here. If Mr. Lin is not satisfied at all, I will ask you. I feel a little uncomfortable. I'm going to rest today. After all, you are mostly young people here, so let's have a good exchange. After Murongfu finished speaking, he turned around and left. The murderous aura in his body became more and more obvious. Everyone looked at Murongfu's back, and they were a little confused and couldn't understand it at all. Why is Murongfu so angry? At this time, Murong Changa came to Lin Yu, and then he picked up the wine glass and toasted Lin Yu with a glass of wine. Mr. Lin, I'll do it first out of respect. After Murong Changa finished speaking, he directly picked up the glass of wine, and then drank the wine in one gulp. At this moment, Murong Changa seemed to have remembered something, and turned around and glanced at Tugu Qinghong. Qinghong, I remember you said that you want to see the north. It's true that I couldn't bring back the snow in the north, but I brought back the snow in the north. After Murong Changa finished speaking, he immediately summoned the ice crystal beast. This ice crystal beast was an alien beast at the level of chaos. After the ice crystal beast appeared, everyone in the scene just felt a chill. Attacking from behind. At this time, everyone felt the extremely cold breath and couldn't help but feel a chill. Everyone's face was slightly shocked. After a while, the sky actually remembered the heavy snow, and the surroundings were soon covered with heavy snow. All the disciples of the Battle Academy who had been born here since childhood and had never been to the north were very happy after seeing the snow scene. And those disciples in the north remembered their hometown in the north after seeing the snow scene in the north. You know, the disciples of the Battle Academy have been practicing hard, and there has not been a year of vacation in the past few years. So for many people, they have never gone home in the years since they came to the Battle Academy. After seeing the snow scene, the disciples of the Battle Academy who have been here for several years couldn't help but tremble slightly in their hearts. They just felt a little bit missing their hometown. A strong man of nearly 2 meters, I don't know when he started to sob. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 599. At this moment, a lingering breath began to gradually spread around, and Lin Yu could clearly feel a sharp chill in the flying snow. That was the cold air between heaven and earth. When a snowflake fell on Lin Yu's shoulder, Lin Yu was a little stunned. He could clearly feel a breath that seemed to be spreading towards his body. That breath began to drill into Lin Yu's body little by little. After Lin Yu felt this, he instantly realized the conspiracy. At this time, Lin Yu's face instantly became a little ugly. He turned his head, his eyes wide open, his eyes were fixed on Murong Changa, and a cold momentum began to gradually spread. At this time, Murong Changa was smiling, looking at Tugu Qinghong, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu took a step forward, and then came to the two of them. Lin Yu turned his head and looked at Tugu Qinghong, and then asked softly, "What's wrong? What are you talking about? Can I come and listen?" Lin Yu said softly and slowly, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Tugu Qinghong also coughed lightly, and then smiled, "Nothing. I just listened to what happened to Brother Murong outside over the years." At this time, Murong Changa looked at Lin Yu, and then slowly raised the wine glass and walked towards Lin Yu. He nailed Lin Yu with a smile on his face. "I wonder if I can invite this brother to drink a cup." Murong Changa raised the wine glass, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was a bit of playfulness in his eyes. After hearing what Murong Changa said, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, and then took the glass of wine from Murong Changa. He shook it gently a few times, and then drank the wine in the glass. "Yes, this wine tastes good, it's quite interesting." Murong Changa looked at Lin Yu like this, just coughed lightly, and finally waved his hand. Ahem, if you like, I can give you all these wines. Murong Changa looked elegant and generous, but Lin Yu found that this person seemed a little strange. Anyway, he didn't know why. Lin Yu had a very bad impression of this person, which could be said to be extremely bad. Murong Changa just stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and there was a bit of playfulness on his face. What's wrong? Is there something on my face? Lin Yu waved his hand. No, I just don't know what Mr. Murong has been doing outside for so many years. Lin Yu said softly, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Murong Changa just waved his hand casually. I haven't done anything serious outside in these years, just playing around casually. What? Mr. Lin, do you want to accompany me to travel? Murong Changa said softly, with a bit of playfulness in his eyes, and a bit of teasing smile at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand. That's not necessary. Lin Yu said softly, and a bit of strange colors flashed in his eyes. At this time, Murong Changa just laughed, and then waved his hand casually. Of course I know that Mr. Lin is very busy, and it is normal for him to be like this now. Murong Changa said slowly, and the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. Lin Yu just coughed lightly. Ahem, I can't say that I am very busy, but sometimes, it is fun to compete with some bastards. Lin Yu said softly, with a bit of mockery in his eyes. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Murong Changa's face suddenly became a little unnatural. He just coughed lightly, and then turned his head to look at Lin Yu. Mr. Lin, I don't know what you mean. Lin Yu just smiled. It means literally. You can't understand it? Lin Yu said coldly, with a bit of mockery in his words. At this time, Murong Changa's face gradually became ugly. You know, the conversation between Lin Yu and him was full of gunpowder from the beginning, and he certainly didn't like that gunpowder. At this time, Du Guqinghong seemed to realize the discord between the two, so he quickly changed the subject. Ha ha ha, Lin Yu just likes to joke, brother Murong, don't take it personally, this guy is not serious. After Du Guqinghong finished speaking, he glared at Lin Yu fiercely, and then said softly. At this time, Murong Changa, who was standing aside, heard what Du Guqinghong said, and then he just waved his hand lightly, and then he smiled. Ha ha ha, no, it's a good thing that Mr. Lin likes to joke. People with humor are popular wherever they go, but humor needs to be measured. Some people who don't know how to measure will not end up well. Murong Changa said softly, with a bit of mockery in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually. Really? I don't think so. At this time, a person slowly walked towards them. The person had a graceful figure and a graceful body. She was indeed a beautiful woman. When this woman appeared, almost all the eyes of everyone were focused on this woman. When they saw the graceful figure of this woman, everyone couldn't help but take a deep breath. Lin Yu also saw the woman at this time. He turned his head towards the woman and just glanced at her, with a complicated expression on his face. The woman came to Lin Yu, Murong Changa, and Du Guqinghong. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Shengchong. Chapter 600. At this time, Murong Changa was groping his chin, looking at the woman in front of him with interest, and the smile on the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. At this time, Bailey Hong Ai just smiled, turned her head and glanced at the two of them, and then spoke softly. I have long admired this great name, and now that I have seen it, it is indeed well deserved. Lin Yu didn't seem to be interested in the woman in front of him. He just smiled, and then glanced at Bailey Hong Ai. It seems that the two of us have met before. Bailey Hong Ai also recognized Lin Yu. This woman's heart was strong enough. She just coughed awkwardly, and then spoke softly. Ahem, I have to thank Mr. Lin for interceding for me about what happened before. Of course, I also apologize for offending Mr. Lin before. If Mr. Lin doesn't mind, I hope you can give me a chance to apologize. Bailey Hong I said softly, staring at Lin Yu with a smile on her face full of expectation. Lin Yu just felt that this woman was a little weird, so he waved his hand gently at this time. Forget it, it's not a big deal in the first place, so let's forget it. Lin Yu waved his hand. But at this time, Bailey Hong I seemed not to give up yet. Bailey Hong I took a step forward, and then said softly, it seems that Mr. Lin still cares about what happened before. Lin Yu didn't have a good impression of the woman in front of him at this time. He just thought that this woman was extremely noisy, so he glanced at Tugu Qinghong. Qinghong, I'm a little bored. Let's go out for a walk and get some fresh air. When Tugu Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, he just smiled softly, then waved his hand, go, but be careful. After Lin Yu heard Tugu Qinghong's prompt, he just smiled, then nodded, and then walked directly outside. After Lin Yu left, Bailey Hong I's eyes were still staring at Lin Yu's back. It wasn't until Lin Yu left for a long time that Bailey Hong I's eyes slowly came back. At this time, Murong Changa seemed to be very interested in the woman in front of him. For some reason, Murong Changa always felt that the woman in front of him was somewhat similar to him in some aspects, and it seemed that this was not the same person. An illusion. Bailey Hong I just smiled, Mr. Murong, I am very happy to meet the rumored eldest son of the Murong family. My brother often mentions you to me. After Murong Changa heard what Bailey Hong I said, he just smiled, and then asked in a low voice, I just don't know who your brother is. Bailey Hong I just smiled like this, my brother is Bailey Chang Feng. I just don't know if Mr. Murong has any impression. At this time, after Murong Changa heard what Bailey Hong I said, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes, and then he also pondered for a moment, your brother is actually Bailey Chang Feng, Mr. Bailey, it's really something I didn't expect. At this time, Bailey Hong I heard what Murong Changa said and just smiled like this, it turns out that young Master Murong really knows my brother. Tugu Qinghong on the side just felt that Bailey Hong I was a bit annoying. At this time, Tugu Qinghong finally understood why his grandfather did not accept this woman as his apprentice. At this time, Tugu Qinghong just turned his head and looked towards the two of them, and then the other person smiled like this, looking at the two of you, you seem to be having a good time talking to each other. If that's the case, then it's just you two here today, let's chat first, I have something else to do, so I won't disturb you two. After Tugu Qinghong finished speaking, he wanted to turn around and leave. At this time, Bailey Hong I saw that Tugu Qinghong wanted to leave, so he stopped Tugu Qinghong, and then smiled, I have to thank you for what happened before. Thank you for telling me Elder Tugu begs for mercy. Tugu Qinghong just felt that although the woman in front of him was extremely beautiful, the things she did were very annoying. So at this time, Tugu Qinghong naturally didn't have a good attitude towards women. Tugu Qinghong just waved his hand casually, and then smiled, really? I don't think so. In fact, I didn't do anything at the beginning, so you wouldn't thank me like this. After Tugu Qinghong finished speaking, he wanted to turn around and leave. At this time, Bailey Hong I just shook his head, I still have some things to do. Wait for another day. I heard that the food at Tianxiang Tower is good today. I hope I can invite you to eat when I have time. I also hope you can give me some thin noodles. Bailey Hong I stared at Tugu Qinghong with a smile on her face, and the smile on her lips became more and more obvious. At this time, Tugu Qinghong's face relaxed slightly after hearing what Bailey Hong I said. Okay, I'll talk about it later when I have time, but I probably don't have much time recently. Bailey Hong I chatted with Tugu Qinghong for a while, and then left with an excuse. At this time, when Bailey Hong Ai was about to leave, Murongkong suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. After Murongkong saw Bailey Hong Ai, he was also shocked. At this time, Murongkong stopped Bailey Hong Ai, and then a flattering smile appeared on his face, which made people feel a little disgusted. Murongkong stared at Bailey Hong Ai, and then smiled. This girl is really beautiful. I wonder if the girl can tell her name. If there is time, how about we have a small gathering in Tianxiang Pavilion? Murongkong's eyes were almost nailed to Bailey Hong Ai, and at this time, Bailey Hong Ai had no good feelings for the man in front of her. So at this time, Bailey Hong Ai just waved her hand lightly, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became more obvious. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I'm going to spoil your interest this time. I'm very busy recently, so I'm afraid. Bailey Hong Ai paused at this point, and stopped talking, just staring at Murongkong with a smile on her face. It can be said that the smile of Bailey Hong Ai has captured Murongkong's soul. At this moment, Murongkong's expression froze.